The chill of autumn had seeped through our bedroom window, left slightly ajar to catch the evening breeze. I pulled the Egyptian cotton sheets higher, their cool smoothness a stark contrast to the warmth emanating from the man beside me. Even in sleep, Matteo Ricci commanded presence. The steady rhythm of his breathing, deep, measured, filled our darkened bedroom with a lullaby I'd grown accustomed to over the past year. The subtle notes of his cologne still lingered, sandalwood and something darker, more potent, clinging to the pillowcase between us. I turned to face him, careful not to disturb his slumber. Moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting silver shadows across the sharp planes of his face. The strong jawline now relaxed, the ever-vigilant eyes hidden beneath heavy lids. It was rare to see him this way, vulnerable, or at least as close to vulnerable as a man like him could ever be. My husband. The word still felt foreign on my tongue, a weight I wasn't sure I'd ever grow accustomed to carrying. 1 year, 12 months since I'd stood in that little chapel, trembling in a white dress I hadn't chosen, promising forever to a man who'd given me no choice but to say yes. I closed my eyes, willing away the memories that threatened to surface. The debt, my father's foolishness, the impossible choice, the way Matteo had appeared in my life like a shadow, offering salvation at a price I couldn't begin to calculate. "I'll take care of everything," he'd promised, his voice like gravel wrapped in silk. "All your father's debts, but you belong to me now, Sophia." Belong. As if I were another acquisition in his vast collection of possessions. Another territory claimed. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed 2:17 a.m. Insomnia had become my only rebellion, these quiet hours my only freedom. In the stillness, I could pretend I was still just Sophia Russo, the girl with dreams of finishing college, opening her own gallery, falling in love naturally, messily, with someone who saw her as an equal, not a prize. I slipped out of bed, feet finding the plush carpet. The massive bedroom still felt like a stranger's, despite the year I'd spent here. 24 years of life in a modest apartment, and now this, a mansion on the outskirts of the city, staffed with people who never met my eyes directly, people who knew better than to see too much, hear too much, say too much. The hallway stretched before me, dim sconces casting long shadows along the artwork-adorned walls. Paintings worth more than my entire previous life hung like trophies, their beauty tarnished by what they represented. Power, control, blood money. I'd learned not to ask questions about where things came from, about the late-night phone calls, about the men who arrived in dark SUVs and left with tight expressions, about the gun I'd once found in the drawer of his desk when I'd been looking for stamps. The kitchen gleamed under the soft overhead lighting I'd switched on, marble countertops, stainless steel appliances, a refrigerator stocked with foods I'd never tasted before meeting Matteo. I filled a glass with water, the cool liquid sliding down my throat as I stared out at the manicured grounds through the window. Security lights illuminated the perimeter, a constant reminder that this beautiful prison was as much about keeping people out as it was about keeping me in. "Can't sleep?" I startled, water sloshing over the rim of my glass onto my nightgown. I hadn't heard him approach. I never did. For a man of his size, Matteo moved with unnerving stealth. "I'm sorry," I said automatically, the apology a reflex developed over months of walking on eggshells. "I didn't mean to wake you." He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed over his chest. The black t-shirt he slept in stretched across broad shoulders, the tattoos on his forearms visible beneath the sleeves, intricate designs I'd never asked the meaning of. His dark hair was tousled from sleep, but his eyes, those piercing, calculating eyes, were fully alert. "You didn't," he said, watching me with that unreadable expression. "I always know when you leave our bed." Our bed. As if it had ever been truly ours, as if I had a claim to anything in this life he'd constructed around me. "Just thirsty," I offered lamely, raising my glass. He crossed the kitchen in 3 long strides, closing the distance between us. I fought the urge to step back, to retreat. Shows of fear only intrigued him more. Like a predator, he seemed to sense weakness, to be drawn to it. "You were restless tonight," he observed, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear. His touch was gentle, always gentle with me, the velvet glove over the iron fist that I knew pulverized anyone who crossed him. "Something on your mind, Bella?" The endearment slid off his tongue like honey, sweet and thick with his lingering accent. 10 years in America hadn't erased the Italian cadence from his speech, especially when we were alone. "Just thinking," I replied carefully. His thumb traced the line of my jaw, tilting my face up to meet his gaze. About? About escape. About freedom. About the life I should have had. Tomorrow. I lied. The charity gala. I'm nervous about meeting everyone. His eyes narrowed slightly, searching mine for the truth. Matteo had built an empire on his ability to detect lies, to sniff out betrayal before it could take root, but he seemed to accept my answer, nodding slowly. "You'll be perfect," he said with quiet certainty. "You always are. That's why I chose you. Chose. Not loved. Not even wanted. Chose. Like selecting the right accessory to complete his image. The respectable wife to balance the whispered reputation. The beautiful, cultured companion who could navigate social circles while he conducted business in back rooms. The young, fertile woman who would eventually bear his children, continuing the Ricci line with offspring that would inherit his kingdom. "It's late," he said, taking the glass from my hand and setting it on the counter. "Come back to bed." It wasn't a request. With Matteo, it never was, no matter how softly he phrased his words. I followed him back through the silent house, up the grand staircase, past the rooms I was never to enter without permission. His hand rested at the small of my back, proprietary, guiding. In our bedroom, he waited for me to slip under the covers before joining me, his larger frame making the king-sized bed feel suddenly smaller. "Sleep," he murmured, pulling me against his chest, one arm draped heavily across my waist, a cage of flesh and bone. I lay still, listening as his breathing eventually evened out, deepened. Matteo was a man accustomed to commanding his world, even in sleep. Within 20 minutes, he was under. But I remained awake, staring at the ceiling, counting the minutes until dawn would free me from this enforced intimacy. In the darkness, I allowed myself to remember, to silently shape a name on my lips that I hadn't dared speak aloud in over a year. "Daniel," I whispered, so softly it was barely a breath. Beside me, I felt Matteo's body stiffen imperceptibly. The rhythm of his breathing changed for just a moment, a slight hitch, a pause too perfect to be natural, before resuming its steady cadence. My heart stuttered in my chest, a cold wave of fear washing over me. He was awake. Had been awake. Had heard. But he didn't move, didn't speak, didn't tighten his grip or demand an explanation. And somehow that terrified me more than any reaction could have. The next morning dawned with a chill that had nothing to do with the October weather. I woke alone, the impression of Matteo's body still visible on the mattress beside me. The shower ran in the ensuite bathroom, steam curling beneath the door. I sat up slowly, fragments of the night before rushing back. The whispered name, the momentary tension in his body, the calculated pretense of sleep that followed. Panic clawed at my throat. In the year I'd been married to Matteo Ricci, I'd learned that his silence was far more dangerous than his anger, his patience more terrifying than any immediate retribution. I slid out of bed, moving to the window. Below, the grounds of our estate stretched out, manicured gardens, the glimmering pool, the guest house where Alberto, Matteo's right hand, stayed when he wasn't handling business in the city. Beyond that, the high walls topped with discreet security systems that Matteo had assured me were for my protection. I'd never felt less protected in my life. The bathroom door opened, releasing a cloud of fragrant steam. Matteo emerged with a towel wrapped around his waist, water droplets still clinging to his broad chest. The tattoo over his heart, a stylized crown with 5 points, seemed especially stark against his olive skin in the morning light. "Good morning," I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. His dark eyes assessed me, gave nothing away. "Sleep well?" he asked, moving to the walk-in closet. A test. The first of many, I suspected. "Yes," I lied, like a stone. He selected a suit, charcoal gray, custom-tailored to his powerful frame. The gala is at 8. Alessandra will be here at 4 to help you prepare. The dress I selected is being delivered this morning. I nodded, watching as he dressed with methodical precision. Matteo never rushed, never seemed hurried. He moved with the confidence of a man who knew the world would wait for him. I have meetings today, he continued, sliding gold cufflinks into place, tiny lion's heads, his family's symbol. I'll be back by 6 to escort you. Another nod. What else could I offer? Disagreement wasn't an option in this household. He approached me then, fully dressed now except for his jacket. The transformation was complete, from the man who slept beside me to Don Matteo Ricci, whose name I'd overheard whispered in fearful tones. He cupped my face in his hands, thumbs brushing my cheekbones. You look tired, Bella, he said softly. Perhaps a nap before tonight? I need you radiant. There will be important people watching. There were always people watching, his people, positioned throughout our lives under the guise of staff, security, friends. The young gardener who tended the roses but whose eyes tracked my every move when I walked the grounds. The housekeeper who reported my phone calls, my visitors, my mail. The driver who took me only to approved destinations and waited, always waited, to return me to this golden cage. I'll rest, I promised. His lips brushed mine, a feather-light touch that nonetheless felt like ownership. Perfect, he murmured against my mouth. Then he was gone, the bedroom door closing quietly behind him. I stood frozen until I heard the distant sound of the front door, the purr of the Bentley's engine as it carried him away. Only then did I allow my legs to give way, sinking onto the edge of the bed as the reality of my situation crystallized with terrifying clarity. He knew. He'd heard me whisper Daniel's name in the darkness, and Matteo Ricci was not a man who forgave betrayal, not even one as intangible as a whispered name, a memory, a longing for what might have been. Daniel Whitaker. My professor at the university, 10 years my senior but with kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. The man I'd been secretly seeing before my father's gambling debts had caught up with us, before Matteo had materialized in our lives, offering a devil's bargain, my hand in marriage in exchange for erasing the substantial sum my father owed to people who didn't extend payment plans or second chances. I hadn't even been allowed to say goodbye. One day I was planning a future with Daniel. The next, I was engaged to a stranger whose reputation preceded him like a shadow. By the time Daniel returned from his conference in London, I was already wearing Matteo's ring, already installed in this mansion, already bound by vows that had felt like shackles. The dress arrived at 10, a shimmering midnight blue creation that probably cost more than a year's tuition at the university I'd been forced to leave. Alessandra followed at 4, as promised. A severe woman with skillful hands who transformed me into the version of Sofia Ricci that Matteo wanted displayed tonight. Elegant, sophisticated, the perfect accessory to his power. The diamond set, she said, opening the velvet case that held the necklace and earrings Matteo had given me on our wedding day. Don Ricci was very specific. Of course he was. The diamonds were substantial, ostentatious even, a visible price tag around my neck, a gleaming reminder of my status as both possession and investment. By the time Matteo returned, I had been polished to perfection, hair swept into an elegant updo, makeup enhancing but not overpowering my features, the blue dress hugging curves that had filled out slightly since our wedding. A year of chef-prepared meals and enforced leisure had softened the body that had once been toned from working part-time as a barista while attending university. Beautiful, Matteo murmured when he saw me waiting in the foyer. His eyes traveled the length of my body, possessive and approving. You exceed my expectations, as always. He stood before me in a tuxedo that emphasized his powerful build, shoulders broad beneath the perfect tailoring, the white of his shirt a stark contrast against his tanned skin. At 42, Matteo Ricci was in his prime, silver just beginning to thread through the dark hair at his temples, lending him an air of distinguished authority. The diamonds, he noted, stepping closer to adjust the necklace, his fingers brushing against my collarbone. They suit you. His touch lingered, warm against my skin. I fought the urge to step back, to break contact. Instead, I smiled, the expression practiced to perfection over the past year. Thank you, I said quietly. They're beautiful. Not as beautiful as the woman wearing them. His thumb traced the line of my jaw. Remember what I told you about tonight? I nodded, reciting the instructions he'd given me last week. Stay by your side unless you indicate otherwise. Speak when spoken to. No alcohol beyond a single glass of champagne. No discussions of business or family matters. A smile curved his lips, approval warming his gaze. My perfect wife. The word hung between us, wife, laden with expectations and boundaries that had been made clear from the beginning. My role was defined, my purpose explicit, to be the respectable face of the Ricci family, to soften Matteo's intimidating presence in legitimate circles, to eventually bear children who would inherit his empire. What remained unspoken was the other aspect of his world, the businesses that operated in shadows, the meetings that took place behind locked doors, the phone calls that he took in his study with orders that he not be disturbed. I had learned quickly not to ask questions. Curiosity was not a virtue Matteo appreciated in his wife. The drive to the city took place in relative silence, the Bentley gliding through traffic as Alberto navigated with practiced efficiency. I watched the landscape change through tinted windows, our secluded estate giving way to suburbs, then the glittering skyline of downtown. Matteo spent most of the journey on his phone, speaking in rapid Italian that I could only partially understand despite my year of intensive lessons with the tutor he'd hired. I caught fragments, something about a shipment, concerns about security, a name mentioned with particular vehemence. I kept my expression neutral, gazing out the window as if the muffled conversation held no interest for me. Another skill I'd perfected, strategic deafness. The gala was being held at the Whitmore Hotel, one of the oldest and most prestigious venues in the city. As we pulled up to the entrance, I recognized the familiar sequence of events about to unfold. Alberto would exit first, opening Matteo's door. Matteo would emerge, buttoning his jacket with unhurried confidence, before extending his hand to help me out. There would be photographers, some from society pages, others working for less official publications with a keen interest in the comings and goings of a man like Matteo Ricci. "Ready, Bella?" Matteo asked, his hand already reaching for mine. I placed my fingers in his, allowing him to guide me from the car onto the red carpet that led to the hotel's grand entrance. The October air was crisp against my exposed shoulders, but I didn't shiver. Matteo disliked displays of weakness in public. "Mr. Ricci," a photographer called from behind a velvet rope. "Mrs. Ricci, over here, please." Matteo's arm slid around my waist, pulling me against his side in a gesture that appeared affectionate to observers, but felt like a reminder to me. His fingers splayed possessively against the small of my back as we paused, allowing a carefully measured moment for photographs. His smile didn't reach his eyes. It never did in these situations, but it was convincing enough for the cameras. We proceeded into the hotel's grand ballroom, a cavernous space transformed for the evening with cascading floral arrangements and twinkling lights that mimicked the night sky. The charity gala was ostensibly raising funds for children's education, a cause that Matteo supported generously, part of the carefully cultivated public image that provided cover for his other enterprises. "Matteo," a silver-haired man approached, hand extended. "Excellent to see you, and this must be the lovely wife I've heard so much about." "Senator Caldwell," Matteo greeted him, his voice warming with practiced charm. "Indeed, this is my Sophia. Sophia, darling. Senator Caldwell sits on the Committee for Financial Oversight." I offered my hand and the practiced smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Senator." "The pleasure is all mine, Mrs. Ricci. I must say, Matteo keeps you quite hidden away. This is your first public appearance in what, 3 months?" I felt Matteo's hand tighten slightly at my waist. "My wife values her privacy," he said smoothly, "and I value her comfort. We prefer our quiet life outside the city." Our quiet life, as if isolation had been my choice rather than his requirement. The evening proceeded as these events always did. A carousel of introductions to people whose names I memorized and promptly categorized. There were those Matteo genuinely respected, those he merely tolerated for business purposes, and those he approached with a particular gleam in his eye that I had learned to recognize as dangerous. The latter received his warmest smiles, his most charming conversation. Matteo was always most lethal when he appeared most friendly. I played my role flawlessly, the attentive wife, the gracious hostess, the ornament on his arm that completed the picture of legitimate success. I laughed at the right moments, showed appropriate interest in conversations about charity work and city politics, accepted compliments about my dress, my jewelry, my beauty, with demure thanks. "Would you excuse us, gentlemen?" Matteo said eventually, his hand returning to the small of my back. "I believe they're about to begin serving dinner." He guided me through the crowd, toward our assigned table near the front of the room. I recognized several faces already seated: the mayor and his wife, a prominent judge, the owner of the city's largest construction company, and his much younger spouse, who offered me a look of understanding that bordered on pity. "You're doing well," Matteo murmured close to my ear as he held my chair. "The senator was quite taken with you." I settled into my seat, arranging the midnight blue fabric of my dress. "He seemed nice." "He's corrupt to the bone," Matteo replied with quiet amusement, taking his own seat beside me. "But useful." The first course was being served when I saw him. Daniel. He stood near the bar, lean and familiar in a tuxedo that wasn't quite as perfectly tailored as Matteo's. His sandy hair was shorter than when I'd last seen him, but his profile, that straight nose, the strong jawline softened by the boyish curve of his mouth, was exactly as I remembered. Exactly as I dreamed during countless nights beside my husband. My spoon clattered against the china bowl, drawing a sharp glance from Matteo. "Sorry," I murmured, retrieving the utensil with trembling fingers. Matteo's gaze followed mine, scanning the crowd until it landed on Daniel. Something cold and calculating settled over his features, gone so quickly I might have imagined it had I not spent a year studying the micro-expressions that betrayed his thoughts. "An acquaintance?" he asked casually. Too casually. The question was a trap. If I lied and claimed not to recognize Daniel, Matteo would know. He might already know exactly who Daniel was, might have known all along. But if I acknowledged our past connection— "From the university," I said carefully. "Professor Whitaker. He taught several of my art history classes." It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. Matteo took a sip of water, his eyes never leaving Daniel's figure. "Interesting. I wasn't aware he would be attending tonight." The implication was clear. Nothing happened in Matteo's world without his knowledge, except, apparently, this, which meant either a significant oversight by the people he paid to control every aspect of our lives, or Matteo had engineered this meeting himself. The thought chilled me to the bone. "We should say hello after dinner," Matteo suggested, his tone making it clear this was no mere suggestion. "I'd be interested to meet one of your former professors." I took a spoonful of soup, forcing myself to swallow past the tightness in my throat. "Of course," I managed, "if you'd like." Dinner progressed with excruciating slowness. I participated in the conversation around us on autopilot, hyper-aware of Daniel's presence across the room and of Matteo's heightened attention to my every reaction. When the final course had been cleared, Matteo stood, offering his hand to help me from my chair. "Shall we?" he said pleasantly, leading me toward the bar where Daniel now stood alone, nursing what appeared to be scotch. He looked up as we approached, recognition flashing across his features. First joy, then confusion, and finally a carefully neutral expression as he registered Matteo's presence beside me. "Sophia," he said, his voice sending a jolt through me. "It's been a while." "Professor Whitaker," I replied formally, acutely aware of Matteo's hand at my back. "What a surprise to see you here. Allow me to introduce my husband, Matteo Ricci." "Matteo, this is Daniel Whitaker, my former art history professor." Daniel extended his hand, meeting Matteo's gaze with admirable steadiness. "Mr. Ricci, I've heard your name around town." Matteo's smile didn't reach his eyes as he shook Daniel's hand. "All good things, I hope." "Interesting things," Daniel replied, a hint of challenge beneath the civility. I held my breath, caught between the two men, one from my past, one controlling my present and future. The tension between them was palpable, electric. "Sophia speaks very highly of the university," Matteo said smoothly. "It's unfortunate she had to discontinue her studies." Family obligations, you understand. Daniel's gaze flickered to me, searching for something I couldn't give him with Mateo watching. A loss for the department. Sophia was one of our most promising students. My gain, however, Mateo replied, his arm sliding possessively around my waist. She's been an exceptional wife. The word hung between the three of us, heavy with implication. Congratulations, Daniel said after a beat, raising his glass slightly. I wasn't aware you were married, Sophia. It must have happened. Quite suddenly. The unspoken question hovered in the air between us. I hadn't told him, hadn't been allowed to. By the time Daniel returned from London, I was already Mateo's. The engagement, wedding, and relocation to Mateo's estate had all happened with military precision in the span of 2 weeks. No time for goodbyes, explanations, or second thoughts. Life takes unexpected turns, I said softly. Mateo's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly at my waist. Indeed it does. But I believe in fate, Professor Whitaker. Don't you? Some things are simply destined. Daniel's jaw tightened. I believe we make our own choices, Mr. Ricci. Do we? Mateo's voice remained pleasant, but I felt the dangerous undercurrent. An interesting philosophical position. Perhaps we could discuss it sometime. I'm hosting a small gathering at our home next weekend. You should join us. My heart stuttered in my chest. Daniel? At our home? It was either madness or calculation. And with Mateo, it was never madness. That's very generous, Daniel replied cautiously, but I'm quite busy with the new semester. I insist, Mateo cut in, his tone making it clear this was not truly an invitation, but a command. Sophia would enjoy reconnecting with her former professor, wouldn't you, Bella? Both men turned to look at me, waiting for my response. Trapped, I manufactured a smile. Of course. It would be lovely. Then it's settled, Mateo said with finality. Saturday, 7 o'clock. My assistant will contact you with the details. Daniel hesitated, then nodded once. I look forward to it. As do I, Mateo replied, his smile not reaching his eyes. Now, if you'll excuse us, I believe they're about to begin the auction. It was a pleasure meeting you, Professor. He guided me away, his grip on my waist unyielding. As we walked back toward our table, I risked a glance over my shoulder. Daniel was watching us go, his expression unreadable from this distance, but his posture rigid with tension. He seems devoted to his students, Mateo observed casually as we reached our seats. Particularly you. There it was. The trap closing. I chose my words with extreme care. He was an excellent teacher, very encouraging of all his students. Mateo held my chair, leaning close as I sat. And what exactly did he encourage in you, I wonder? His breath was warm against my ear. The question delivered in a tone that might have sounded playful to anyone else. But I knew better. The game had begun, and Mateo was always 10 moves ahead. The drive home was silent, the space between us and the back seat of the Bentley charged with unspoken tension. Mateo stared straight ahead, one hand resting casually on his thigh, the other holding his phone, though the screen remained dark. I kept my gaze fixed on the passing streetlights, their glow illuminating the interior of the car in rhythmic pulses. You're quiet, he finally said, as we passed through the iron gates of our estate. I turned to him, careful to keep my expression neutral. Just tired. It was a long evening. His eyes, so dark they appeared almost black in the dimness, studied my face. Did you enjoy seeing your professor again? There it was. The question that wasn't really a question at all, but a test. With Mateo, every conversation was layered with meanings beneath meanings. It was unexpected, I replied truthfully. Life is full of unexpected moments, he said, his Italian accent becoming more pronounced as it always did when emotions ran high beneath his controlled exterior, like hearing your wife whisper another man's name in the darkness. My breath caught in my throat. The pretense was over. Mateo! Not here. He cut me off smoothly as the car came to a stop before the front entrance. Inside. Alberto opened the door, his face impassive as always. I stepped out, legs unsteady beneath me, the weight of what awaited inside pressing down on my shoulders like a physical burden. Matteo followed, nodding once to Alberto before placing his hand at the small of my back to guide me up the steps and through the massive oak doors. The house was quiet, the staff having been dismissed for the evening as was customary when we attended events. Only the security detail remained, positioned discreetly around the perimeter of the property, invisible but omnipresent. "Your jewelry," Matteo said once we were in our bedroom, gesturing to the diamonds still adorning my neck and ears. "Take it off." I obeyed, fingers trembling slightly as I removed the earrings first, then reached behind my neck to unclasp the necklace. He watched me, expression unreadable, as I placed the pieces carefully in their velvet-lined box. "Now," he said, removing his bow tie with unhurried precision, "explain to me why my wife whispers another man's name in our bed." The directness of the question stripped away any possibility of evasion. I stood before him in my midnight blue gown, the diamonds removed but their phantom weight still present around my throat. "It was nothing," I attempted weakly. "A dream, perhaps." His laugh was soft, dangerous. Sophia, I thought we had moved beyond lies between us." He approached me slowly, circling like a predator. I remained still, knowing from experience that attempts to retreat only provoked him further. "Let me tell you what I know," he continued, his voice deceptively gentle. "Daniel Whitaker, 34 years old, associate professor of art history, specializing in Renaissance and Baroque periods. Divorced, no children. Lives alone in an apartment downtown that costs more than his university salary should allow." He paused directly behind me, his breath warm against my bare shoulder. "Published several well-received papers. Currently working on a book about patronage in 16th century Florence." My heart hammered in my chest. The level of detail in his knowledge could mean only one thing. He'd had Daniel investigated thoroughly. "But what the investigators couldn't tell me," Matteo continued, moving to face me again, "was what exactly he was to my wife before she became mine." The possessive emphasis on mine sent a shiver down my spine. "A teacher," I whispered. "He was my teacher." Matteo's hand rose to cup my cheek, the touch deceptively tender. "And what else, Sophia? What aren't you telling me?" I closed my eyes, unable to meet his penetrating gaze. "We were close." "Close," he repeated, the word dripping with skepticism. "Define close for me, Bella." There was no escaping this interrogation. Matteo would extract the truth one way or another, and if he discovered I was still lying after this confrontation, we were seeing each other, I admitted, opening my eyes to face whatever reaction would come. "Privately, before you and I met." His expression didn't change, but something darkened in his gaze. "Seeing each other," he echoed. "You mean fucking." The crude word from his usually measured lips shocked me more than if he'd shouted. "It wasn't like that," I protested. "It was..." "What? Love?" His smile was cold. "How romantic. The professor and his student. A classic tale." He turned away, removing his cufflinks with methodical precision and placing them on the dresser. The lion's head seemed to stare at me accusingly. "Did you love him?" Matteo asked without looking at me, his voice unnervingly calm. Truth or lie? Which was more dangerous in this moment? "Yes," I whispered, choosing truth. "I did." He nodded once as if confirming something he'd already known. "And now?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications and consequences. Did I still love Daniel? Of course I did. The year of forced separation hadn't dimmed those feelings. If anything, they'd been preserved like an insect in amber, frozen in time, perfect and untouchable in memory. But to admit that to Matteo would be suicide. "Now I'm your wife," I answered carefully. He turned to face me, eyes narrowed. "That's not what I asked." "What do you want me to say, Matteo?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "You bought me. You know that. My father's debts, my family's safety. That was the arrangement. I've honored it. I've been the wife you wanted." Something flashed in his eyes. Anger, certainly, But beneath it, something that almost looked like pain. Bought you, he repeated, the words flat. Is that how you see our marriage? A business transaction? Isn't it? I challenged. Recklessness born of fear making me bold. You made my father an offer he couldn't refuse. You gave me no choice. He moved with the liquid speed that always caught me off guard, closing the distance between us in 2 strides. His hands gripped my upper arms, not painfully but firmly enough that I couldn't pull away. I saved you, he said, his voice low and intense. Your father owed money to people who would have taken payment in your flesh, in your blood, do you understand? When I found out about his debts, about who he owed, I stepped in because I had seen you once, just once, at that gallery opening, and I couldn't bear the thought of what would happen to you. I stared at him, struggling to process this revelation. What are you talking about? What gallery opening? The Mendelssohn Gallery. Your photography was being featured. Student work. You were wearing a black dress, your hair down. You laughed with such abandon at something someone said. His grip softened, one hand rising to touch my cheek. I had never seen anything so beautiful. I remembered the exhibition. It had been 6 months before my father's debts came due, before Matteo entered my life officially. I had no recollection of seeing him there. You were watching me? Even then? I saw you, he corrected, and then I made inquiries, discovered who you were. Your father's situation came to light during that process. My mind raced, reconstructing the timeline he was describing. So you... What? Bought his debts to get to me? To protect you? Matteo insisted. The men he owed. They aren't like me, Sophia. They don't have rules, limits. They would have destroyed you. And you saved me, I said, the words bitter on my tongue, by making me your prisoner instead. His expression hardened. My wife, he corrected. I made you my wife, a wife who isn't free to leave, who is watched every moment, who had to give up her dreams, her education, your lover. He finished for me, eyes glittering dangerously. That's what this is really about, isn't it? Not your education. I offered to arrange private tutoring to complete your degree, not your photography. I built you a darkroom here. You're angry because I took you from him. I couldn't deny it. All the other losses paled beside the loss of Daniel, of the future we'd planned together. Why invite him to our home? I asked, changing tactics. Why arrange for us to see him tonight? Was it a test? A smile curved Matteo's lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. Everything is a test, Bella. Life is a series of tests. Did I pass or fail when I whispered his name? His hand slid into my hair, cradling the back of my head. That depends on what happens next. Fear coiled in my stomach. What do you mean? Saturday night, he said simply. When your professor comes to dinner, that will determine everything. The implications hung in the air between us, unspoken but clear. This was no casual dinner invitation. Matteo had something planned, something that terrified me precisely because I couldn't anticipate what it might be. Please, I whispered, my hand rising to touch his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath expensive fabric. Don't hurt him. He doesn't deserve that. Something dark passed over Matteo's features. Deserve, he repeated, the word laden with contempt. What do any of us truly deserve, Sophia? I didn't deserve to watch my father die when I was 12. You didn't deserve a father who gambled away your safety. Your professor didn't deserve to find something precious only to lose it. His fingers tightened in my hair. Not enough to hurt, but enough to emphasize his control. Life isn't about what we deserve. It's about what we take, what we protect, what we're willing to fight for. And what are you willing to fight for? I asked, my voice barely audible. His gaze burned into mine. Everything that's mine. The possessiveness of the statement should have angered me, but instead, an unexpected shiver of something else, something dangerous, ran through me. In that moment, with his face inches from mine and his hand tangled in my hair, I glimpsed the raw intensity that made Matteo Ricci both feared and followed by so many. Turn around, he commanded softly. Your dress. I obeyed, presenting my back to him. His fingers found the zipper, sliding it down with deliberate slowness. The whisper of the metal teeth parting sent another shiver across my skin. The midnight blue fabric loosened, slipping forward off my shoulders. "Step out of it," he instructed. I did as he asked, the dress pooling at my feet like spilled ink. I stood before him in only sheer black lingerie. His preference, always his preference. "Look at me," he said. I turned to face him, resisting the urge to cover myself. His gaze traveled over me, possessive and appreciative, but also searching, as if looking for something beyond the physical. "Do you know why I wanted you, Sophia?" Beyond the beauty that first caught my eye, I shook my head slightly, because I saw something in you that reminded me of myself at your age. A hunger, a determination. His hand traced the curve of my waist, my hip. A capacity for darkness that you hide beneath that innocent exterior. "I'm not like you," I whispered, though something inside me stirred at his words. His smile was knowing. "Aren't you? The woman who stands before her husband in the lingerie he selected while whispering another man's name in the dark? There's a certain duplicity there that suggests otherwise. Shame and defiance warred within me. "What do you want from me, Matteo? Really want?" "Everything," he said simply. "Not just your body, not just the perfect wife you pretend to be for the public. I want what's in here." His hand pressed against my sternum, between my breasts, above my hammering heart. "The truth of you, the darkness and the light. I want your surrender, not because you have no choice, but because you choose to give it." "And if I can't?" I asked, my voice trembling. His expression softened fractionally. "Then we remain as we are. You, my beautiful prisoner. Me, your jailer. Both of us trapped in a prison of our own making." His thumb brushed across my lower lip. "But I think you can. I think part of you wants to." Before I could respond, his mouth claimed mine in a kiss that was neither gentle nor brutal, but consuming. Unlike his usual calculated affection, this felt raw, almost desperate. I found myself responding despite my fear, my confusion, my lingering thoughts of Daniel. My arms rose to encircle his neck, body arching into his touch as his hands roamed my nearly bare skin. When he finally broke the kiss, we were both breathing hard. "Saturday," he said, his voice rough. "After dinner with your professor, then we'll know where we stand, you and I." He stepped away, leaving me swaying slightly, off balance in more ways than one. "Get some sleep," he added, moving toward the bathroom. "Tomorrow will be busy." The door closed behind him, the sound of the shower starting moments later. I sank onto the edge of the bed, mind reeling from the conversation, from his revelations, from my own confused response to his touch. What game was Matteo playing? And more importantly, what would happen to Daniel when he entered the lion's den on Saturday night? The following days passed in a haze of tense anticipation. Matteo was unexpectedly attentive, arriving home early from his business dealings to take meals with me, asking about my day with apparent interest, even suggesting we walk the grounds together in the evenings. It might have seemed romantic to an outside observer, a husband reconnecting with his wife. But I recognized it for what it was. Surveillance. He was watching me, evaluating every reaction, every word, every flicker of expression as Saturday approached. I played my part, responding to his attention with practiced smiles and careful conversation. But beneath the performance, my mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. What did Matteo intend for Daniel? For me? The uncertainty was its own form of torture, precisely as Matteo had intended, I suspected. By Saturday morning, my nerves were stretched to breaking point. I sat at my vanity, brushing my hair with methodical strokes, when Matteo appeared in the doorway of our bathroom. He was freshly showered, a towel wrapped around his waist, water droplets still clinging to the defined muscles of his chest and shoulders. The crown tattoo above his heart seemed to watch me through the mirror's reflection. "I've selected your dress for tonight," he said, moving to the closet and returning with a garment bag. Something special. He laid it on the bed, unzipping it to reveal a dress I'd never seen before. Crimson silk that would undoubtedly cling to every curve, with a neckline that plunged dangerously low. Not his usual selection for me. Matteo typically preferred me in more conservative styles when we entertained guests, saving the revealing pieces for events where he wanted to display me more overtly. "Red," I observed, my voice carefully neutral. "It's beautiful. It will be, on you." He approached, standing behind me as I continued brushing my hair. Our eyes met in the mirror. "I have business in the city this morning. I'll return by 5 to prepare for our guest. Singular. I had assumed there would be others, that Daniel would be just one face in a crowd of Mateo's associates. The realization that he would be our only visitor sent a fresh wave of anxiety through me. "Just Professor Whitaker?" I asked, unable to keep the question contained. Mateo's hands came to rest on my shoulders, his thumbs brushing the sensitive skin at the nape of my neck. "Just him," he confirmed. "I thought a more intimate setting would be appropriate for reconnecting with your former mentor." The implication hung in the air between us. This was no social gathering, it was a confrontation, carefully staged and controlled. "What are you planning, Mateo?" I finally asked, setting down the brush and turning to face him. He cupped my cheek, his expression almost tender. "Clarity," he replied cryptically. "By the end of tonight, everything will be clear." His thumb stroked across my lower lip. "Wear your hair down. It suits you better that way." With that, he turned and walked back into the bathroom, leaving me with the crimson dress and a growing sense of dread. After Mateo left, I found myself pacing the house like a caged animal. The staff moved around me with their usual quiet efficiency, preparing for the evening's dinner, carefully avoiding direct eye contact or conversation beyond what was absolutely necessary. They had been Mateo's people from the beginning. I had no allies here. At noon, I changed into jeans and a sweater, telling the housekeeper I was going for a walk in the gardens. It was a beautiful autumn day, the leaves of the estate's ancient oaks and maples ablaze with color. I followed the stone path that wound through carefully tended flower beds, past the silent fountain, closed for the season, and toward the small lake at the property's edge. It was my favorite spot, as far from the house as I could get without crossing the boundaries that would trigger security alerts. I sat on the weathered bench overlooking the water, watching a pair of ducks glide across the surface, leaving ripples in their wake. What was I going to do? The question circled endlessly in my mind. Whatever Mateo had planned for tonight, it couldn't be good for Daniel. Should I try to warn him somehow? But how? My phone was monitored, my computer activity tracked, my movements observed. Any attempt to reach out would be detected almost immediately. And what about myself? These past days had revealed something unsettling. Mateo knew me better than I'd realized. His words about seeing darkness in me, about my capacity for duplicity, they had struck uncomfortably close to home. There was a part of me that responded to him, to his intensity and his possessiveness, in ways I didn't want to acknowledge. "Mrs. Ricci?" I startled at the voice, turning to find Alberto standing a few feet away. As always, he had approached without making a sound, a skill he shared with his employer. "Alberto," I acknowledged, straightening my posture. "Is something wrong?" "Not at all," he replied smoothly. "Don Ricci asked me to check on you before I depart for the city. He was concerned you might catch cold out here." Translation. Mateo wanted confirmation of my whereabouts, verification that I wasn't attempting anything foolish before tonight's dinner. "How thoughtful," I said, keeping my tone light. "But I'm fine, thank you." Alberto nodded, his dark eyes assessing me with the same clinical detachment he'd shown since the day I'd arrived at the estate. "The Don also asked me to remind you that your guest will arrive at 7. He suggests you begin preparing by 4. 3 hours to transform into Mateo's vision, standard procedure for important events." "Of course," I replied. "Please tell him I'll be ready." Another nod, and then he was gone, moving back toward the house with silent efficiency. I remained by the lake for another half-hour, watching the ducks, trying to clear my mind. When I finally returned to the house, I found a lunch tray waiting in the sitting room adjoining our bedroom, a delicate salad, fresh bread, and a glass of sparkling water with lime. Mateo's standing orders, light meals before events where I would be on display. The afternoon slipped away as I bathed, allowing the hot water and essential oils to soothe my taut nerves. By the time Alessandra arrived to assist with my hair and makeup, I had achieved a state of artificial calm, the practiced serenity of a condemned prisoner who has accepted their fate. "The red dress," Alessandra noted, as she began arranging my damp hair into loose waves. A bold choice. It was the closest thing to personal commentary I'd ever heard from her. I met her eyes in the mirror. "Matteo's choice," I corrected quietly. Something flickered across her usually impassive features, understanding, perhaps even sympathy. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by professional focus as she continued her work. By the time Matteo returned at 5, I was nearly ready, my hair falling in glossy waves past my shoulders, my makeup more dramatic than usual with smoky eyes and crimson lips that matched the dress I had yet to put on. He paused in the doorway of the dressing room, his gaze traveling over me appreciatively. "Beautiful," he murmured, crossing to kiss my bare shoulder. "Put on the dress. I want to see you in it before I shower." I slipped into the silk garment, the fabric cool against my skin as it slid into place. As I'd suspected, it clung to every curve, the neckline dipping low between my breasts, the slit along one side revealing a glimpse of thigh with each step. Matteo circled me slowly, his expression unreadable. "Perfect," he said finally, his finger tracing the edge of the neckline, sending a shiver across my skin. "One more thing." He withdrew a small box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a necklace I'd never seen before, a ruby pendant surrounded by diamonds, suspended on a delicate platinum chain. "Turn around," he instructed. I obeyed, lifting my hair as he fastened the necklace around my throat. The pendant nestled in the hollow between my collarbones, its weight both substantial and delicate. "There," he said, turning me back to face him. "Now you're ready." "For what?" I asked, unable to stop myself. His smile was enigmatic. "For whatever the evening brings, Bella." He brushed a kiss across my lips, careful not to smudge the crimson color. "Wait for me downstairs. I won't be long." Precisely at 7, the security system announced a vehicle at the gate. I stood in the grand foyer beside Matteo, who had dressed with his usual impeccable taste in a charcoal suit that emphasized his powerful build. His hand rested at the small of my back, warm through the thin silk of my dress. "Smile, Sophia," he murmured as the front door opened to admit Daniel. "Your professor has arrived." Daniel stepped into the foyer, momentarily faltering when he saw us standing there, a perfect tableau of martial harmony. He had dressed well for the occasion, a navy suit that fit his lean frame nicely, though it lacked the bespoke perfection of Matteo's attire. In his hand, he held a bottle of wine. "Professor Whitaker," Matteo greeted him, stepping forward with outstretched hand. "Welcome to our home." Daniel shook the offered hand, his gaze flickering between Matteo and me. "Thank you for the invitation," he replied, his voice steady despite the tension evident in his posture. "I brought this." He offered the wine, an expensive vintage, I noted. Daniel had clearly done his research. "Thoughtful," Matteo commented, examining the label with approval before passing the bottle to the waiting staff member who had materialized silently beside him. "Sophia, darling, won't you greet our guest?" I moved forward, hyper-aware of both men watching me. "Daniel," I said, the name feeling strange on my tongue after so long. "It's good to see you." He smiled, the familiar expression sending a pang through my chest. "You look well, Sophia," he replied, his eyes communicating far more than his careful words. "The red suits you." "A recent acquisition," Matteo interjected smoothly, his hand returning to the small of my back. "Shall we move to the sitting room? Dinner will be served in half an hour." He guided us through the house, playing the gracious host as he pointed out architectural features and artwork to Daniel, who responded with appropriate appreciation. I walked beside my husband, acutely aware of Daniel's presence just steps behind us, of the surreality of having these two parts of my life, past and present, occupying the same space. The sitting room was prepared for our arrival, a fire crackling in the massive stone fireplace, lights dimmed to a warm glow, 3 crystal glasses arranged on the antique sideboard beside a decanter of amber liquid. "Scotch?" Matteo offered, already moving to pour. 18 years old, from a small distillery in the Highlands. A personal favorite. "Thank you." Daniel accepted, taking the offered glass. I accepted my own glass, though I had no intention of drinking more than a sip. I needed my wits about me tonight to new friendships, Matteo proposed, raising his glass. We drank, the scotch burning a fiery path down my throat. Matteo gestured toward the seating arrangement, 2 sofas facing each other across a low table set with small appetizers. Please, make yourself comfortable, he invited Daniel, claiming a spot on one sofa and drawing me down beside him, his arm draped possessively across my shoulders. Daniel sat opposite us, his posture relaxed, but his eyes alert. You have a beautiful home, he observed. Quite a distance from the city. Sophia prefers the tranquility, Matteo replied smoothly. And I prefer her happiness. I felt Daniel's gaze on me, questioning, but I kept my expression neutral, taking another tiny sip of scotch. So, Professor, Matteo continued, Sophia tells me you specialize in Renaissance art, a fascinating period. Yes, Daniel agreed, seeming relieved at the shift to safer conversational ground. The intersection of art, politics, and patronage during that era has been my focus for several years now. Patronage, Matteo repeated, swirling the liquid in his glass. The relationship between power and creation. I've always found that dynamic instructive. How so? Daniel asked, a hint of wariness entering his tone. Matteo smiled. The greatest art often emerges from constraint, wouldn't you agree? The patron sets boundaries, provides resources, creates the environment in which the artist can flourish, within certain parameters, of course. The metaphor wasn't subtle. I tensed beneath Matteo's arm, feeling the conversation moving into dangerous territory. Some would argue true art requires freedom, Daniel countered, his eyes briefly meeting mine. Freedom is overrated, Matteo replied, his voice pleasant, but his grip on my shoulder tightening slightly. Structure, protection, guidance, these are what allow talent to reach its full potential. Without them, even the most gifted individuals can lose their way. The subtext hung heavy in the air between us. Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he maintained his composure. An interesting perspective, he said carefully, though perhaps somewhat outdated in modern contexts. Matteo's laugh was genuine, if cold. I've always found the distinction between outdated and timeless to be largely a matter of perspective, Professor. Some traditions endure because they work, because they speak to something fundamental in human nature. Before Daniel could respond, a staff member appeared at the doorway. Dinner is served, sir. Excellent, Matteo said, rising and offering me his hand. Shall we? The dining room was lit by candles, the long table set for 3 with Matteo at the head, me to his right, and Daniel across from me. The intimacy of the arrangement was deliberate, forcing direct interaction throughout the meal. The wine was poured, a different bottle than the one Daniel had brought, and the first course served with silent efficiency. Your health has improved since university, Matteo observed casually as we began to eat. Sophia mentioned you were frequently ill during her final semester. Something stomach-related, wasn't it? I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. I had never mentioned any such thing to Matteo, because it wasn't true. Daniel had been perfectly healthy during my time at the university. Daniel's eyes met mine briefly before returning to Matteo. I don't recall any significant health issues, he replied carefully. No? Matteo raised an eyebrow, looking at me. Perhaps I misunderstood, darling. I thought you said Professor Whitaker was often absent due to illness, that another faculty member frequently substituted for his classes. The fabrication was so specific that it momentarily stunned me. It was a stressful time, Matteo supplied smoothly. With your father's situation and our whirlwind courtship, memory plays tricks under such circumstances. Daniel's gaze darted between Matteo and me, confusion evident in his expression. I'm afraid I don't understand what... It's not important, Matteo interrupted, waving a dismissive hand. The past is the past, isn't it? What matters is the present and the future. He raised his wineglass in a casual toast, but his eyes remained cold, calculating. I took a small sip from my own glass, mind racing as I tried to decipher Matteo's strategy. The fabricated story about Daniel's illness, the pointed references to my father's situation. He was creating a narrative, but to what end? The main course arrived, perfectly cooked fillets, roasted vegetables, truffle-infused potatoes. Matteo continued his role as gracious host, steering the conversation through seemingly innocuous topics: the charity gala, recent exhibitions at the city's museums, upcoming cultural events. But beneath the civility, tension crackled like electricity before a storm. "Sophia mentioned you were working on a book," Matteo said as the staff cleared our plates. "About patronage in Florence, I believe?" Daniel nodded, visibly relieved to return to professional ground. "Yes, focusing on the less examined aspects of the Medici influence on artistic development." "The Medici," Matteo mused, swirling the remaining wine in his glass. "A fascinating family. Bankers, politicians, power brokers, they understood how to build and maintain influence across generations, how to eliminate threats and reward loyalty. They were also responsible for an unprecedented flowering of culture and art," Daniel countered. "Their legacy extends far beyond their political machinations." "Does it?" Matteo raised an eyebrow. "Or is that simply the narrative they purchased with their patronage? History, after all, is written by those with the resources to commission its telling." Before Daniel could respond, Matteo turned to me. "Sophia, why don't you show Professor Whitaker the gallery while dessert is prepared? I'm sure he'd appreciate your collection." It wasn't a suggestion. I rose, smoothing the crimson silk of my dress. "Of course. This way, Daniel." I led him from the dining room, acutely aware of Matteo's gaze following us as we departed. The gallery was located in the east wing of the house, a long room with perfect lighting and climate control, housing Matteo's impressive collection of art. Some pieces were legitimate acquisitions from reputable dealers. Others, I suspected, had more questionable provenances. "Sophia," Daniel whispered urgently once we were alone. "What is going on? Why am I really here?" I glanced toward the discreet security camera mounted in the corner of the room. "Admiring the collection," I replied in a normal tone, gesturing toward a nearby painting. "This Caravaggio is particularly striking, don't you think?" Understanding flickered in his eyes. He nodded, moving to examine the painting while continuing our conversation in a lower voice. "Is this some kind of test? Are you in danger?" "I don't know," I admitted softly, guiding him further into the gallery. "Matteo heard me whisper your name in my sleep. He knows about us, what we were to each other." Daniel's face paled slightly. "Christ, Sophia, why would he invite me here then? To what end?" "I don't know," I repeated, stopping before a small dega. "But whatever he's planning, it culminates tonight." Matteo's voice came from the doorway. I hadn't heard him approach. I never did. We turned to find him leaning casually against the doorframe, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. "I see you've been admiring my collection, Professor. Do you find it impressive?" Daniel straightened, visibly gathering his composure. "Very. You have exceptional taste. In all things." Matteo agreed, his gaze shifting to me. The weight of his attention was palpable, assessing, calculating. "Dessert is served. Shall we?" We returned to the dining room, where delicate chocolate soufflés awaited alongside snifters of expensive cognac. The conversation lulled as we ate, the silence charged with unspoken tensions and possibilities. "I must say," Matteo finally remarked, setting down his spoon, "this evening has been most illuminating." "Has it?" Daniel asked cautiously. "Indeed." Matteo reached for his cognac, swirling the amber liquid before taking a small sip. "It's not every day one dines with the man who once claimed his wife's heart." The bluntness of the statement hung in the air between us. Daniel's gaze shifted to me briefly before returning to Matteo. "Mr. Ricci." "Matteo, please," he corrected smoothly. "I think we're beyond formalities at this point, don't you? After all, you've been in my thoughts quite frequently these past days." "Have I?" Daniel's voice remained steady, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the careful calculation behind his eyes, ever since my wife whispered your name in the darkness of our bedroom. Matteo confirmed, his tone conversational, despite the incendiary content of his words. It raised certain questions in my mind. I sat frozen, unable to intervene, to deflect, to control what was unfolding before me. "I can imagine," Daniel replied carefully. "But whatever existed between Sophia and me, ended when she married you. Matteo's smile didn't reach his eyes. Did it? I wonder. He turned to me. Sophia, would you say your feelings for Professor Whitaker ended with our marriage? The direct question caught me off guard. Both men watched me, waiting for my response. Daniel with trepidation, Matteo with that unnerving calm that preceded his most dangerous moments. My voice faltered. Truth or lie? Which would be more damaging in this moment? The truth, Bella, Matteo urged softly. No more pretending between us. The gentleness in his tone gave me courage, though perhaps unwisely. No, I admitted. They didn't end. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, a flash of pain crossing his features. Matteo nodded slowly, as if I had confirmed something he already knew. And you, Professor? He asked, turning to Daniel. Did your feelings for my wife conveniently disappear when she became unavailable? Daniel hesitated, then met Matteo's gaze directly. No, he said simply. They didn't. The admission hung in the air between us, dangerous and true. I waited for Matteo's reaction, for rage, for violence, for the cold fury I'd glimpsed in rare moments when his control slipped. Instead, he laughed. The sound was startling in the tension-filled room, genuine amusement that transformed his usually guarded features. Honesty at last, he said, raising his cognac in a toast. How refreshing. Confusion replaced fear as I studied my husband's expression. This wasn't the reaction I had anticipated. Not from a man who had built his reputation on swift and merciless responses to perceived slights and betrayals. I don't understand, I said, unable to contain the words. Matteo set down his glass, his expression sobering. No, I don't suppose you do. Neither of you does. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, fingers steepled. Let me explain the situation as I see it. I have a wife who loves another man. This presents a problem for me. Daniel tensed, perhaps expecting the conversation to take a threatening turn. But Matteo continued in the same measured tone. I have considered various solutions to this problem over the past week, he said. The most obvious would be to eliminate the rival. His gaze shifted to Daniel. A simple matter, from a practical standpoint. The casual reference to murder sent ice through my veins. I opened my mouth to protest, but Matteo raised a hand to silence me. But this solution has certain drawbacks, he continued, chief among them being that it would virtually guarantee my wife's eternal hatred. Additionally, Professor Whitaker appears to be a man of some intelligence and integrity, qualities I find myself reluctantly admiring. He reached for his cognac again, taking a deliberate sip before continuing. The second option would be divorce, setting Sophia free to return to her former life, her former love. Hope flared briefly in my chest, wild and unexpected. This option, however, presents its own complications, Matteo added. I am not a man who relinquishes what belongs to him. More importantly, I have grown attached to my wife. The thought of her absence from my life is unacceptable. The hope withered as quickly as it had bloomed. Which brings me to the third option, Matteo said, his dark eyes moving between Daniel and me. A compromise. What kind of compromise could possibly exist in this situation? Daniel asked, breaking his careful silence. Matteo smiled. That depends entirely on how open-minded the parties involved are willing to be. Understanding dawned slowly, followed by disbelief. You can't be serious, I whispered. Perfectly serious, Matteo replied. I am a businessman at heart, Sophia. I recognize when a situation calls for negotiation rather than force. You're suggesting... Daniel began, then stopped, apparently unable to articulate the implication. I'm suggesting an arrangement, Matteo confirmed, one that allows Sophia to maintain her connection with you under certain controlled circumstances, while remaining my wife in all public and legal respects. The proposal hung in the air between us, outrageous and unexpected. I stared at my husband, searching his expression for some sign that this was a trap, a test, a prelude to something more sinister, but his gaze was steady, his demeanor calm. Why would you offer this? I finally asked, It goes against everything I know about you. Your possessiveness, your control. Something vulnerable flickered briefly across his features. Because I want something I cannot take by force, Sophia. I want your heart. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine, and I have come to realize that perhaps the path to gaining it is not through further constraint, but through a different kind of possession, one freely given. I don't understand, I repeated. Don't you? He challenged gently. Think about what I'm offering. Freedom within boundaries, choice within structure, the ability to maintain your connection with Daniel, to explore what might have been, but with the safety and security of my protection, my name, my resources. And what do you get from this arrangement? Daniel asked, his tone skeptical. Mateo's gaze remained fixed on me. The possibility of winning what I truly want, through patience rather than force, and in the meantime, a wife who might come to me willingly rather than out of obligation, who might eventually see beyond the monster to the man. The vulnerability in his voice caught me off guard. For the first time since our marriage, I glimpsed something beneath Mateo's carefully maintained facade, a loneliness that mirrored my own, a hunger for connection that transcended physical possession. And if I refuse? Daniel asked quietly. Mateo's expression hardened slightly. Then you walk away tonight unharmed, with the understanding that any attempt to contact Sophia in the future will have serious consequences. She remains my wife, and you remain a memory. The choice hung before us, impossible and surreal. Daniel looked at me, 1,000 questions in his eyes. What do you want, Sophia? He asked softly. What did I want? The question echoed in my mind, deceptively simple, yet impossibly complex. Did I want freedom? Safety? Love? Could I trust Mateo's offer, or was it merely another form of control, more insidious for its illusion of choice? I looked at the two men before me, Daniel, with his honest eyes and the promise of what might have been, Mateo, with his dangerous power and the glimpse of vulnerability that had humanized him in my eyes for the first time. I began, then paused, gathering my courage. I want to try. This arrangement, something like triumph flashed in Mateo's eyes, quickly masked. Daniel studied me intently, perhaps searching for signs of coercion. Are you sure? He asked. I nodded slowly. Yes. I think I need to find out what's real, what's possible. Mateo raised his glass once more. To possibilities, then, he proposed. And to truth, however complex it may be. Daniel hesitated, then lifted his own glass. I joined them, the crystal catching the candlelight, as our glasses met in the center of the table. That night, as I lay beside Mateo in our bed, his breathing steady in sleep beside me, I allowed myself to whisper a different truth into the darkness, not a name this time, but a realization. I'm not a prisoner anymore, I murmured, the words barely audible. Or perhaps I've chosen my prison. Either way, the choice was mine. Beside me, Mateo's breathing changed subtly. A slight hitch, a pause. Then his arm slid around my waist, pulling me closer against his chest. Not a prison, Bella, he whispered against my hair. A kingdom. Our kingdom. His lips brushed my temple. Sleep now. Tomorrow is the first day of our new arrangement. As I drifted toward sleep in the circle of his arms, I realized with startling clarity that for the first time since our marriage, I felt something like peace, not happiness, not yet, but possibility, and perhaps in time, that would be enough.